Welcome to the War Story Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Jones. If you are joining us for the first time, a very warm welcome to you. If you're a returning listener, then thanks for being with us. Always great to have you in. And before we start, just a big thank you to everyone who's quote-unquote paying the fee, which is for every episode that you listen to and find some kind of value in or education in or entertainment in or whatever it is. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast, if you listen to it through, then please use those share buttons or use the share hole in the front of your face and tell a mate about it. It's the only way that we can grow the podcast. Well, it's not the only way. It's the only way I can afford, to put it that way. So if you could, please spread the word. Tell your mates, bring a mate along for every episode that you enjoy. Really, really appreciate it. We do have two formats on this network. Last episode, we had Veteran State of Mind, which is where we concentrate more on what a veteran has done after their service. And we have the War Story format, which is about operations. We've got one of those episodes today. I've just finished recording it. Had a fantastic guest on. His name's Matt Okuhara. He served in the Rifle Volunteers. He's the first reservist soldier we've had on, I believe, other than myself. And it's really a crazy story that I'll let Matt tell you himself. But it's definitely an underrepresented story. Like Matt will tell us about, there was a period in Iraq where 20% of the troops out there were reservists. So he's written a book called Basra and Back, the memoir of an infantryman in the Iraq War. You can get that now. That's linked down in the show notes. Matt has also graciously agreed to give a signed copy of his books to one of our listeners. So if you follow on social media at Veteran State of Mind, the details about how to get your name in for that are on there. But if you could, if you have a few spare pennies and you'd like to support a good bloke, then please do check out Matt's book, linked down in the show notes. All right, let's get into the episode. Matt, welcome to the podcast, mate. Good to have you on. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome, mate. First guest to ever join us from Japan, I believe.
Right, yes.
It's pretty interesting story. So before we dive into your military service, I'd love to just know a bit more about what you're up to today. You sent me that pretty interesting page on Instagram.
Yeah. Well, in Japan, I'm an interpreter for martial arts, but a samurai displating. Samurai's big in Japan. English isn't as big, so having someone who can actually translate from Japanese to English for visitors to this city and we've got a really big castle here, the oldest in Japan. So I managed to get into that team as an interpreter, and because I've been in for years and years and years, eventually said, hey, do you want to have a go? I said, yeah, I'll have a go. And then so I interpret around. I take part in some of the displays as well now.
And what city is that?
Matsumoto, which is like right in the middle of the main island, Honshu, so it's right in the middle of the mountain.
And how long have you been out in Japan?
9 years. I've been 9 years in Japan now, so it's coming on a decade, so a long time, yeah.
Well, that obviously kind of speaks for the fact that you enjoy yourself there, but how does it compare? What are the main differences between living in Japan and living in the UK?
The biggest thing is dead hot in the summer and freezing cold in the winter. So it's like 40 degrees in the summer and minus 15 in the winter. So that's autumn's still coming along, but it's still red as out there. So that's the biggest difference. And then the other big difference is everything's fish. I hate fish, right? You've got to eat fish. I can't stand the stuff. So those are the two main. But I said that my biggest gripes are not the differences. The big difference is Japan's like a really sort of a homogeneous country. It's hard to find foreigners. I'm certainly in the minority. There's about 1% of the country is foreigners, and then also people are completely different to the UK. They're really, really polite and well mannered, and that took some getting used to as well. Even though I thought I was a pretty decent guy, these guys were even better than me. So yeah, those are the big differences.
And what about there's a TV show came out recently. I was a big fan of the book before that, Shogun, right? Oh yeah. Did you watch that with the samurai kind of story? What did you make of it? If you did,
I didn't. I've read the book, same as you. I never watched it because it's based on a true story. This lad called he's from Kent his name was William Adams, and he changed his name to Miura Anjin when he arrived in Japan. He was a navigator on a ship, so really, in reality, what he did is he actually taught the architecture of ships and better navigation techniques to the Japanese, which they didn't have much knowledge of. Despite being a seafaring nation like the UK, it's an island nation, they weren't as advanced as the European were. And so he ditched his missus and stayed in Japan and got married and had kids here instead.
So I would say that's right. Yeah, the TV show is great, by the way. Everyone's read it, but you can't beat the book. But you need to set some time aside for it because there is a long film. Yeah. Oh yeah. All right, mate. So let's get back to the UK then. I assume. Did you grow up in the UK and
yeah, I grew up in Gloucestershire. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So what would you kind of describe your childhood as?
Yeah, I had a good childhood, really. Kind of semi-affluent. I had a decent size, lived in a decent house, and lived in a semi-rural location, and good school. My parents had 3 kids. I was the dumb one, and they both got into sort of like grammar school. They had to pass exams and stuff, and I was a bit lazier than they were. I wasn't particularly bothered, so I went to a different school. But it was a pretty enjoyable childhood, and then sort of early teens, the parents split up and there was difficulties. But that's not uncommon, as far as I can tell, these days. And so that's the only main difficulty I had in my childhood. But yeah, if I had to live that childhood again, I'd say, yeah, that's fine. That was pretty enjoyable.
And where was it and when was it that you started to find yourself drawn towards the forces?
I always had a real interest in the military. I know there was 2 jobs growing up. Even since I was like 6, 7 years old, I thought I want to be a policeman because my dad's a policeman, or I want to be in the army. As it happens, I ended up doing both. The army was the first thing I did. And down the road from us at the reserve centre, or the TA centre at the time as they called it, every time I went to my father's house from my mother's house, I had to drive past the TA centre, and there's a big sign outside and it says it's part-time, but it's a real soldier's job. And I saw that time after time after time. When it came to career choices, I thought, well, am I going to join the army? And I thought, wow, yeah, maybe I'll give it a go. But I also, because my older brother was in banking, he got me into retail banking, which pays a hell of a lot of money. So I thought, well, I'm not going to give this up. And I joined the Territorial Army at the local TA centre, which was an infantry regiment, at the same time as going into banking.
And did you have any family that served?
Not since the Second World War. No. On my father's side, my gramps was a Royal Engineer. He fought in North Africa, then he did the invasion into Southern Europe. On my mother's side, he was in the RAF. He was an accountant, so he didn't actually have a combat role. But both of them were former military, but they skipped a generation. Mother and father, they didn't serve. My brothers, they didn't serve and still don't. And then I was the next one.
And what was your family's kind of opinion of you joining the TA?
Well, they knew it was coming. They knew there was a strong likelihood I was going to join the military because I was seriously looking into. I've been to the career centre and I looked at the Navy as well as the Army. Actually, I didn't really fancy the Air Force, but because this job offer came along, I took the banking up. But I didn't have a car at the time, so when I wanted to go down to the TA centre, I had to say to my mate, "Can you give me a lift to the TA centre?" So this crow, he's 18 years old, and I looked like I was 12 at the time, but that was basically my first exposure to the military. I was getting dropped off at the TA centre gates by my mum.
And what year would this be?
That was 2003, February 2003. That's when that was.
Okay, so what was? Can you remember the 9/11 moment for you, and if that had any bearing on you wanting to be in the forces?
I remember 9/11 because I was skiving off school and I was watching Kerrang TV, which is like a music channel at home. And my girlfriend at the time, she sent me a message saying, "Change channel." I watched it. I thought, "Oh, right, okay." And I watched with great interest. But like I said earlier, I was either going to join the military, probably the army, or the police. That was always my long-held ambition. And I guess the 9/11 thing would have accelerated that desire because, as you remember at the time, because I guess we're around about the same age, the papers were just full of that initial push into Afghanistan with the Marines going in, and then the occupation force, and then a couple of years after they had the. I was in the TA by then. I was following with great interest all the news articles about the invasion of Iraq during the Second Gulf War. So yeah, I guess it was probably a catalyst which kind of moved things along for me. And to be honest, when I joined the TA, I mean, I was like the worst soldier ever. I wasn't that bad. I was all right, I guess. But I was not cut out for the infantry despite being there, and that's what I ended up doing.
So did you have any expectations? So you joined just before the Iraq invasion, basically.
Yeah.
So I assume when you started doing the training and everything, obviously Iraq kicks. Well, the Iraq buildup was probably going on at the time. Did you ever think that you'd end up in Iraq?
I didn't. No. And then our TA center had only ever had one call up, and that was for a clerk who was sent out to Kosovo to do some paperwork. So everyone's like, oh, no. And it never happened. In the end, they pretty much emptied the TA center with backfill. So I didn't think it was going to happen. When I did get called up, it was a hell of a surprise. I was like, oh my God, really? I had to read it 2 or 3 times just to confirm, and then got on the phone to my mate and say, hey, did you get, I just got some posts. I was like being a bit standoffish. Some letter come through, and you got any letter too? And he texted back saying, yeah, I got my 18 to 30s brochure as well, because obviously he was more in the know and spoken to others. It turned out that 16 of us from Gloucester were being brought in for reserve service, full-time military service.
So this must have moved really quickly then. So you joined Feb 2003, and then you went out that same year, right?
I went out the year after, so February.
Oh, the year after.
Yeah. So I'd had 12 months, but in that 12 months, like it did move quick. I'd done. You were TA as well. I remember listening to on the podcast. Do you remember phase 1? That was like cadet stuff when it was like dead easy.
It was just like weekend. I think it was like 8 weekends, 5 weekends. Was it?
I had 5. I don't know. Maybe it was different to you. But I had 5 weekends, and the weekend wasn't even a weekend because the Friday was get on the bus, get dropped off at a place, and then go to sleep. Right, then you wake up and have breakfast. You do training all day, and then Sunday you finish by lunchtime and go home. Right, so it's only a day and a half as opposed to a weekend. But then 5 of them, and then a 2-weekend camp with a weekend drinking in the middle. Right, and that was my combat infantryman's course. So rounding up and being very generous, including all the Tuesday evenings and calling them half a day instead of a quarter day was there. I had less than 30 days service before when my call-up papers came through.
That is mental. Yeah, well, I'm glad you did the maths there, mate, because I was starting to get steam coming out of my ears trying to total the days here. But so when you got the papers then, it seems like it was a bit of a shock. Was there any thought, because this would have been, it was compulsory mobilization, right? Yeah. So, but was it, would you have been put against the wall and shot if you said, I'm not going, or would it be something that you could have turned down if you wanted to?
There was no opportunity to turn it down. I remember there was another lad from Gloucester. He went to the mobilization at Chilwell, and he put in a compassionate with one of the welfare officers there and said, hey, let my mum sit with something. So he never had to go, but the rest of us did. But I wouldn't have wanted to. My name came up, so I said, yeah, fine. I mean, I was a shock, absolutely. And then, I was young, naive, wet behind the ears, a proper racing snake, couldn't carry much, But, the name had come up, so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do this because these people, who I didn't know very well, out of the people that called up, I didn't know most of them by first name because I'd been in the recruit platoon. These guys were in the assault pioneer platoon, so I didn't know them. I thought, well, I'm one of them now, so I'm going to let them down. I'll try my best and see what happens.
With the mobilization then, was it chosen at random? Had people kind of get did this, because I know sometimes maybe on like laser tours, I know some of the guys I went, it was more like, right, we want 100 people to backfill one of the parent regular battalions. Can we get 100 volunteers? And then those volunteers would be compulsory mobilized. So how do you have any kind of inclination whether they just picked 16 guys who they thought would be good for the job, or was it just like some unknown computer person at Glasgow just punching numbers in? Do you have any inclination of as to how that was?
I reckon they probably, there's no official. I never asked. I wouldn't know who to ask, but there was no official record of how they pick, but I reckon they probably did. I reckon probably because it was about 90 of us in total from the Southwest. It was all from the Rifle Volunteers. We said the northernmost unit is like Gloucester, and the southernmost is down Truro in Cornwall. And there was 90 of us, so like 86 in total, officers and blokes. And I reckon probably all the company commanders and the Lieutenant Colonel, whose name is Blewett, Lieutenant Colonel Blewett, he is in charge of they probably had some say about who was going to go. They probably had a mandate to say, you got to get this many people. I can't imagine it was 90 people, because of the 90 that I'll just go with 90. The 90 that were selected, none of them were like awful. They were all fit. You know, it's like an TA. You have some people who have like a drinking problem or unfit or can never pass a PPFA or whatever. None of those people came. It was only people who were like reasonably good at weapon handling, you know, always passed the fitness, didn't cause waves, and, you know, turned up regular like. So it was those guys who got called up, not the ones who are a little bit more questionable in their commitment. So I probably did say, this guy's good, this guy. I reckon.
Makes a lot of sense. So what was the for people who aren't familiar with the compulsory mobilization process, you know, you've got a job at this time, a civilian job. How does that work then with your job?
Yeah, well, I had this compulsory mobilization letter, and I spoke to the PASOS, the Permanent Staff Administration Officer at the TA Centre, and he said, you've got to let your boss know soonest about this mobilization. I was called up on the Saturday, so the letter came on the Saturday, so I took it to the bank where I worked on the Monday. And I said, well, look, I've got this mobilization letter. I've got to go and for the Optelic, it was called, wasn't it? But they didn't know what Optelic was. That's what the letter said. I said, I've got to go and fight in, go to Iraq on this date. It says I have to be at the mobilization center by this date. I'd like the week off beforehand just to get my affairs in order. And they said, yeah, fine. And luckily, because it was a big organization, a big band, we had a very large sort of like centralized HR department. And my guess is they must have had other people mobilized in the past, maybe for Afghan or maybe previously. And it was actually quite easy. They gave me some proof of income because, like I said, the reason I joined banking instead of the army full time is because the money was better. And I was thinking, right, I want to still get paid this in. I'm going to Iraq on a pay cut. So I got all this documents sorted out, and I turned up at the TA Centre and then went to Chilwell for mobilization.
So just to make so you get paid by the army what you're getting paid in civilian work, so you're not taking a pay cut, and then the army, the MOD, whoever would also then be paying the company to fill your role, and your job is protected while you're away.
The job's definitely protected. I don't know how they arrange for the backfill, but yeah, my wage was made up by the army to match. So I was a private, and I was lowest of the low. But I was on, getting a bit more than a private would. But interestingly, we had a corporal. He's just a section commander in our platoon, but he's a licensed solicitor. Right, he was taking on more than the major. So and I had to make his up. So they did make the money up for us.
Yeah. Okay. So what did you find with the reserve mobilization center or the mobilization center at Chilwell? What was the process? What was the process there? Could you just talk us through a kind of like an almost like a day-to-day of what you go through to go from being called up to right now full-time service for a certain period of time?
Right. It took 2 days to get through the mobilization center, which is like a day, a night, and a day, and then after that day came to an end, we moved out to where we were doing our pre-deployment training, the first section. So basically a short weekend as opposed to a long weekend. Turned up in a minibus from the TA Centre with all the other lads from Gloucester, got dropped off. Luckily, the NCOs who have been, they seemed to know which way to go and where to go, and so we went and joined. And we weren't the only ones being called up. A lot of reserves were being called up, so the matter of finding other people who were doing the same thing as me was I only know the guys from Gloucester. There must have been, 300 or 400 reserves at the centre at the time. It was a really busy place. So we turned up, and the first thing we did was get the administration sorted out. They issued you sort of like Mod 90, because the Mod 90 we didn't. I don't know what it was like then, but we never carried them in the TA. We got given this Mod 90 ID card. to say this is you, and well, I really am a soldier. So you're looking at it and you look at your number, yeah, that's all correct. Sorting out the pay details and all the administration to take you from civvy to full-time soldier. So making sure you've got a will in place, you've got to go and get a dental check, a medical check, a welfare check. Like I said, one of our guys dropped out on that welfare check because we speculated, because we never saw him again. Once we came back, he'd gone, he'd left the TA. I guess he was a bit embarrassed or something. But we speculated, he said that his mum was poorly. Which could well have been the case. I mean, you wouldn't want to leave your mum if she was poorly, would you? But he never came with us. And we had to go and get our equipment. We had to go get issued a weapon, magazines. We got issued webbing, although I had already bought my own sort of Arctis vest anyway. Desert kit, there wasn't much of that, so we started to make do with green. Got our CBA, combat body armor, issued as well. But it was not done in a precise sequence. My order of doing things was different to the order of doing things for my best mate at the time. His name was Bros. His name was Broslin. He was my best mate at the time. So I couldn't hang around with him and do it. He just had his list for your own schedule. And you had to be at the place, of course, 5 minutes beforehand, because that's army time, isn't it? To do all this checklist. Stayed the night, got up, had a battery of injections. Anthrax was optional. I never took the anthrax injection. Some people did. The officers had to take it. The company commanded made the officers take an anthrax injection. I hope they're all right, because that seems like a pretty nasty one to have. And then finally, we formed up on the parade ground at the very end of Chilwell, which was about 40 hours after arriving. And we were formed into a company and allocated into platoons there on the parade ground.
All right, before we go on, I'm going to open the door for the cat who has been shouting at me.
Yeah, I got that problem.
Come on in. Yeah, I know. All right, back in. So
I get this thing.
Yeah. Oh, but it's nice to have the attention. She is the executive producer of this podcast. So what was the general feeling then amongst the company about the fact that you were, one, going out in the first place, but also going out as a reservist infantry company?
The feeling was pretty mixed. There was a mixed bag. There were people who were caught up and didn't want to go. There's certainly some very reluctant people who ended up going. I was pretty enthusiastic. I was young, dumb, and full of whatever. So I wanted to go. But some of the more senior people who had done it before, they'd been ex-regulars. It was like, the same shit, different tour. They didn't want to go. And then there was people who were like, what, really? I can't believe I've been called up. I was only joined to sort of not play soldier, but, they were only expecting to fight if World War III happened. So it started like that. So for that reason, the build-up training was kind of like morale building as well as team building as well as weapon handling. They kind of tried to combine that all into one go, because there was a noticeable reluctance from a few of the people who had been called up, and a noticeable vigor from the other half. So you had to try and make these two opposing sides kind of work together so they could go on to the next stage of training before deploying.
And what were your own personal opinions about the Iraq War at the time?
Well, at the time, it seemed like a just war, didn't it? I mean, you remember seeing George Bush on TV and says, "My fellow Americans," of course, I'm not American, but this is what was broadcast there. So at this time, American and coalition troops are moving into Iraq to disarm the country and change the regime. This is just paraphrasing, but that sort of thing. You thought, well, yeah, of course. I mean, we'd all seen Bravo 2-0 win the first Gulf War, hadn't we? So we were going in to finish what they didn't. That's how it seemed at the time. So yeah, I thought, I didn't feel it was unjustified. There were already some questions around the WMDs, which I don't know if they turned up. I never found them. I don't know if anyone else did. There was a little bit of a question about it. I remember seeing that 1 million person march that was on the TV. That was in Westminster. Funnily enough, there's just been a big march in England again, hasn't there? Don't get that problem in Japan. And I remember as well, because I live not too far from Fairford, RAF Fairford, where the B-52s land and take off from. And there was a lot of protest activity on the outskirts around the base, people protesting against it. So, it seemed on the face of it to be controversial. But me personally, I thought, It's a just war. Saddam Hussein, he's a bad man. His kids are bad people. I can't remember them. Qasi Hussein and I think that was his name.
Uday,
yeah, Uday Hussein. They were these bad people doing bad things. And, they did the Iran war. They used chemical weapons. They gas kids, and they do this to Kurds, and now they've got weapons again. So we have to go and get the weapons. That's how it seemed at the time, and the media certainly did a good job portraying that. We know better now, but at the time, when you're 19, yeah, it seemed like a just invasion.
You mentioned your age there. Like, obviously, in a regular infantry battalion, what maybe a lot of our listeners might have served in, that's probably the age of most of your Toms, 18, 19, 20 years old.
Yeah.
Might be worth asking, what was the kind of age ranges of this TA company? Did you have some extraordinary old privates and some, right? It's a bit of a difference compared to a regular kind of structure of rank and age, isn't it?
Right, well, I was 19, right? And I was the youngest, and there was another guy, and he was 20. So I was the youngest by a few months, and this guy was 20. Another private from Gloucester, and he was kind of about, he was 39, so he was 20 years older than me. He's a private, and he was in the Assault Pioneer Platoon, right? I only knew three things about him, right? I knew he was in the Assault Pioneer Platoon, right? I knew he had a lot of tattoos and a shaven head. He looked like a criminal, right? And I knew that he had a piercing through the end of his cock because someone had told me, right? So I just believed that it was true. But he was 20 years older than me. And I remember saying to him one time when I was walking, because I just wanted to get to know people, because they didn't know me either. I said, yeah, so these are some nice tattoos. And he said, how old are you? And I said, well, I'm 19. He said, my tattoos are older than you, mate. So I thought, wow, yeah, there is a big age difference. We had a corporal 47, privates in their late 30s. The officers were, all in their mid-20s, and the 2IC and the OC, they were both what you'd expect for military people at that age. And then we had a couple of sergeant majors. We had two sergeant majors. One was the reservist sergeant major, so he was a reservist himself, and he was coming on to 50. And then we had another sergeant major who was full-time, brought in as a TACAD, and he was slightly younger, maybe about 45. So the age difference between the company was me being the youngest at 18, and the CQMS's corporal, he was 47. So that was the age range of the company.
And what are the pros and cons, do you think, of having that kind of age range in a TA company in the rank structure?
Well, you always hear in the when someone joins the army, if you join the army full time, and I'm sure the listeners will relate to it, you were reservists the same as me. When you join the army, as I'm led to believe, is they deconstruct you and they turn you into a soldier, don't they? You are a soldier now. You go through basic training and you do whatever your trade training is, whether it be infantry engineers or whatever, and they turn you into what they want you to be. Well, you don't get that with reserves, dude. You can't work at a bank and be very friendly and sell loans and things if you're a nasty, horrible piece of work, can you? But you can be an infantry reservist. So what the main difference was there is you actually had a really sort of like broad church of people who were more familiar, I guess, with each other than maybe an infantry unit, maybe. And people are going to say, what? No, you're up. I'll just qualify what I mean. If I was full-time, and I'd only done 6 months full-time, I hope to admit, and that was it. But you only knew them. You only knew your mate. You didn't really know their mum and dad or their relations. In a TA unit, you did. Because especially in a small TA unit like Gloucester, you knew your section commander, but you also knew your section commander's brother who happened to go to school with your mum because they're around about the same age, and you knew the sons and daughters of others because they're around about the same age as you. And it's sort of like a bigger community with its fingers stretching out possibly a bit further than a regular service would. And that familial feeling kind of came with us. Well, it certainly came with me. You had not just one father, but you had several father figures. And it was that came with me. And I think that was maybe the big difference. They kind of I wouldn't have had the confidence to speak to a full-time. So in fact, I never spoke to the sergeant major because he was full-time. If I had a problem, I went to someone I knew, spent time with. I guess it's the same but different for full-time and regular. So it was a bit like that.
Yeah, something I'd come across because I think people forget that like a big part of the Second World War Army was territorial and the first. And one of the interviews I saw was a soldier, and he'd served in a regular battalion and he'd served in a TA company, because I think he'd got sent to a TA one after he'd been wounded. And he was talking about the difference, and because he kind of said something I never really thought about before, which is because you're all kind of drawn from quite often like one town or one area. You know, these are people who, after this tour, you're going to be, you know, I might come into the bank to get a loan from you, or or like you might work in my gym, but like everyone's a lot more concentrated in those areas and things. And I thought that was quite an interesting kind of take on it, because I think there's one argument that can be made that if you know people, the discipline can be less. But then I think there's the other side of the coin is if you know your reputation's going to be lifelong rather than maybe a couple of years long, then you might treat people a bit differently. You might give a bit more, you know, that kind of thing. So I think there's definitely arguments both ways for it. In terms of like what you were doing as a company then, when were you first kind of sat down and briefed, like, this is the reason you've been called up, this is what you're going to be doing once we get out to Iraq?
Yeah, once we'd formed up from Chilwell, we got bused to Trigantal Fort, which is on the south coast, to do training there, which is like kind of familiar territory. We did most of our training in the south on Dartmoor and places, and would be common. So went to Fort Trigantal, and the OC gave us, there's a lecture theatre there, and that's where he gave us a brief and explained we were going to be a force protection company, is what he said. And I thought, what's the force? I'd never learned about force. I mean, like, I'd done 10 days, and basically when you phase one, you're just a soldier, and you haven't got a trade. So I'd been an infantry soldier for 10 days. No one explained to me what a force protection company was at the 10 days that I was doing combat infantryman's course. So I said, yeah, what's a force protection company? That means you're going to be guarding things, staggering on. Turns out that isn't what we did at all. By the time we got out to theatre, that changed. But he did say, you're going to be a force protection company, and we're going to focus on, routines and QRA, quick reaction, gates, searches of personnel, searches of vehicles coming in and out of the base. And so we had these kind of like policing skills. And I thought, oh, great. You know, that was my other career choice. I wanted to be in the police. So we're kind of having this policing soft skills being taught to us, as opposed to the harder combat skills. So our build-up training really focused around security as opposed to combat.
And who's running the training for you?
It was all run in-house. The major and his officers, they designed their own scheme of work for what they wanted to do. But we were subordinated to one PWRR. They were the direct link above us. They were sent to Anamara, but we were in, and it was very, very famously so, because they were at Simic House. At the same time, we were at Basra Palace, but our direct boss was actually the OC, and Matt Mayer, I think his name was. He was the direct link above us, but in practical terms, when we're actually in theatre, the nearest colonel was controlling us. But on paper, that's what we were going to do. But, no clan survives contact with the enemy. And by the time we got out of theatre, what we planned for, even me as a private, I could see that what we've been training and what we planned for didn't match the expectation of theatre once we got there.
So you went out on Telex 4. Obviously, reservists had been called up for the previous Telex, but it sounds like this was the first time where it was a force protection company was formed purely from TA battalion. Is that correct?
Yeah, first time since the Suez Crisis. So not since the late 50s, under 57 or something like that. There'd never been a formed TA company. Maybe you've had a platoon, battle replacements and volunteers, but it was the first time since a whole formed company was sent in, and we were sent to be the force protection company for Basra Palace, which was called Allsop Lines at the time. So, and that was the CPA, the Coalition Provisional Authorities base of operations. So on top of British forces, there was also the civil forces. They're not civil forces, but the civil component, like politicians, diplomats, and those sorts of things, along with a ton of American mercenaries who had really nice sunglasses, and I had really cheap ones that I got at service stations. And I felt a bit jealous then.
So when did you go out there? And I guess as well, like when you went out there, what were your expectations from the tour in terms of what you'd be seeing, what you'd be experiencing?
Well, we flew out on the 16th of April in 2004, and then we had a week at Schreiber Logistics Base, which is basically, it had been a World War II airfield, I think, and given its size, it was turned into a logistics base for the the coalition forces in general. Now, we had a week of build-up training there, and everything seemed like it was going to be the way it was going to be. We just a bit of acclimatization, a bit of fizz, a bit of rugby and respirators and that sort of thing just to get used to the heat. And then it came to the time where we had to get onto Saxons. Do you remember those big battle buses? We bussed by Saxon to Basra Palace. And once we arrived at Basra Palace, I mean, we were straight into it. I was in 3 platoon, which was only one multiple in strength, so 15 guys. 1 platoon and 2 platoon had 2 multiples each, so we're 4-size platoons. So we had 2.5 platoons. Our multiple was the first one to go out on patrol. So out of the entire company, 3 platoon was the first out on patrol that very night. So we had a few hours to get ready. And the other multiples were straight into the guard tower, straight onto QRF, straight into the gate, manning the signers and the search positions and such. And then one multiple was going to be getting ready for doing morning patrols because we arrived at night. So we're going to do night patrols. So there was no sort of defining moment. There was no threshold moment. It was basically, right, Cyber's finished, you're in Basra, woof, this is what Force Protection Company does, do it. And you just, as you know, you just get it, go ahead and do it. We've been training for it. There's only so much you can really train, because the difference between training in Dartmoor and it's snowing, because it was snowing, and in 40-degree heat in Iraq. Well, you know, in a city, Dartmoor, there's about as much habitation as there is vegetation. There's nothing. It's empty, isn't it? So there was a little bit of a dichotomy, a little bit of a difference between what we've been training for, which required a lot of imagination into what we experienced once we got there. It took some getting used to, for me, certainly.
And when you went on these patrols, is it soft hat patrols? Are you speaking with the locals? Like, what are the kind of things you're going out? How far are you kind of patrolling out? Is it for just as much detail as you want to give me on what these kind of patrols would look like when you first got out there?
They started small, they got big, they got really big towards the end. So the first patrol I went out to was soft hat patrol, which was nice. You know, in being a TA battalion, when you went on patrol, there was a whole range of berets going. So I was in the Gloucesters, I got his back badge on the back, and one at the front, and we had light infantry guys in their green, and we had Devon and Dorsets with their castle on their front. So when you went on patrol, it was just a mix of cat badges with that. It looked pretty good when we did it, and we had our helmets clipped to our belts. To start with, we had a small area of operations, and it was all color-coded. The map was color-coded. We were in the pink sector. And so really, didn't really have much of a remit. They were pink because all the sectors were named after snooker balls. Blue was the next sector, for example, like on a snooker table. So we didn't really need to go into the blue sector or the green sector. Pink was around the palace. And so we patrolled around there. I've always enjoyed studying languages. One of the reasons why I like Japan, because you have to speak Japanese. No one speaks English here. And so I'd learned a bit of Arabic before going, especially from the OPTAC guys, Operations Training Advisory Group. They had some classes when you're off duty if you wanted to do a bit of language skills. So I took them up on it. So I tried to speak to the locals wherever you go past, but it was nothing really more than hello, how are you, or that sort of thing. I wasn't expecting them to talk back to me. And the vast majority of the time, what you'd say is give them a greeting. They greet you back, salam alaikum, and then they come back. If they said lots at me, I just look at them wide-eyed, I guess, and you think, oh, actually, I'm walking. This kid doesn't know what he's talking about. But yeah, for that first month, right, so we arrived on the 16th of April, and then we had a week of build-up training. The company's first contact wasn't until the 14th of May, so we had like 3 weeks going around, and maybe we got into a false sense of security, and this is going to be all right. The outgoing company had no contacts at all on Helix 3 at Basra Palace. Everything was always quiet. It was a great tour. It's easy to do, a bit boring at times. It's thought, okay, well, if we have something the same, then at least we'll all come back. Maybe we'll have any war stories, but we'll all get back. That's not what happened in the end. But that first 3 weeks, soft hat patrols, like you said, small area of operations, false sense of security was certainly king my way, I guess, to the others as well. And when we did end up getting contact, and we did get quite a few, it was a a single swim moment is a real big culture instant shift from one way of soldiering to another.
So you mentioned one PWR up in Alamara. Is it fair to say then that when you went out, the kind of the atmospherics, the feeling in the city was very different in that April when you arrived to then May and that summer? And if so, what was the reason behind that change?
Well, the change was on TEDx 3 and TEDx 2, there was the Coalition Provisional Authority in place. There was no local government. So there was no mayor, there was no local councillors, those sorts of things. It was all handled by the CPA. So they made sure that the hospital was working. If you didn't have running water, they had distribution points where they could give out water bottles. They paid whoever lived closest to the police station to put on a blue shirt and carry an AK and say, hey, you're a cop now. So they were trying to install some sort of normality and provide basic services. Okay. TEDx 4 comes along, and then in June, there was going to be elections. The CPA was going to be wound down, and they were going to handle their own affairs. Now, this is where the big problem came in, right? Because it's very, very difficult for terrorists or insurgents to attack the coalition as a whole. But as they start withdrawing, there's more opportunity for them. And these people who wanted to be perhaps the mayor or a councillor, maybe they were sympathetic to the coalition cause. That's not going to go down so well with the ousted people from the Ba'ath Party or the insurgents. And so we had this sort of like environment where there was a lot of murder, a lot of attacks, a lot of people going missing, particularly political candidates, to try and encourage the population to vote for Muqtada al-Sadr's people, because he was the guy in charge of I guess he was in charge, and he's the politician there now. Don't sue me. But he was trying to get his people in place at the expense of other politicians, regardless of whether that was shedding blood or blackmailing them or whatever. And that caused an absolute deterioration in society, because whilst they were doing that, the CPA, the Coalition Provisional Authority, they were winding down as well. So services were reducing. And so there was less available to the general population. And of course, when there's nothing available and you need something and you're going to die without it, you're going to go and take it. And so that really didn't help the environment at all.
So against that kind of backdrop then, were you made aware of this at the time? Were you kind of forewarned that, look, this is going to kick off, or is this a lot of this stuff that you know now? Because that's a very great answer, to be quite honest. And I'm thinking, if you knew that at the time as a 19-year-old squad, I'd be very impressed. So is this more of a this is something you picked up later? Like at the time, was it just one day they're not shooting us and now they are?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I didn't fuck all that. So whilst I was there, I was like, oh yeah. So one day when they would come into contact, oh my god, I'm under contact. And you just do what you were going to do. But this is 20 years ago. I've had 20 years to think about it and look into it, and talk about it. And so I found out about it at the time. Now, we knew the CPA was coming out. We knew there was an enhanced risk of problems. And then, you know how officers put things. They don't say, oh, it's going to be dangerous. So there was an enhanced possibility of blah, 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 that sort of thing. I said, okay, can we go on patrol? Because let's finish this patrol. I want to go to bed at time. So we weren't particularly prepared for it. And I'll give you an example. Our first contact, right? So we went out with 3 Iraqi cops. There was supposed to be 4. One of them didn't turn up for some reason. He probably knew better than to turn up. So we went with 3 Iraqi cops. We had to go to Basra Hospital, which is 800-900 meters away from Basra Palace. Not far at all. So it's a foot patrol. That's easy. You carry 1 water bottle, maybe 2. You don't need that much. And the cops had to go. They wanted to go and pick someone up. They wanted to go and lift someone. And all they had to do was find him. And when we were having the briefing, our boss, he says, okay, so we're looking for a white Toyota pickup. That's a needle in a stack of needles in Iraq. It's either a taxi or a white Toyota pickup. So the cops, they had to check every white Toyota pickup. And this was at night. And they didn't have torches, right? One of them had an AK, 2 of them had Marikov pistols. I guess that's just what they were given. None of them had torches, so they couldn't look into the cab. So they had to stop cars under streetlights that were working. And we were like in the shadows, just monitoring. But all of a sudden there was a gunfire started. I don't remember whether it was a burst of fire, maybe a shot of fire. But we started running towards where this contact was. One of the cops was down. And I started, because I'd done a medical training, not a lot of medical training, but enhanced above sort of like the normal infantry course. I was treating this guy. and we were actually in contact. I didn't realize I was in contact until after the contact. There was such a detachment from what I was doing in reality and to where my mind was at the time. It just hit me like a bolt out of the blue. I did what I was supposed to do, and I guess other people who've been in contact would have been a lot cooler than me. I've listened to your podcast before, some really heroic guys on there. I would not put myself anywhere near them. I was flapping big style, but I was still there and I did my job. And it was after the contact that I realized, fuck me, did that really happen? And of course it happened. I was up to my elbows in blood from I'd been treating this guy. One of the other cops had been shot to treat him too. The third one was missing. We never found him. Whether he ran away or got lifted by someone, we never found out, and no one ever told us. But there was a huge difference between, for me, that shift in that societal shift, that environmental shift in Basel City over the space of about 3 weeks. I enjoyed patrol at the start because I'm talking to people. Look at me, I can speak Arabic. Yeah, I'm a big hard soldier. Look at me, right? 3 weeks later, there's me, swearing to myself, doing all the soldiery things and think, oh my God, am I really doing this? So yeah, it was a big difference.
How did you find dealing with the casualties then? So is it the team medic course that you were kind of talking about?
That's right. Yeah, I did the team medic course.
So again, that's about, what is it? About 3-4 days, is it? Something like that? So again, you're kind of throwing
confirmatory exercise, right? So they bleeding, breathing, breaks and burns in that order, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then confirmatory exercise at the end. So that qualifies you to be a team medic, right? That doesn't qualify this cop. His arm is literally blown off, right? So his shoulder had been reduced to like pulp and fragment where the round had hit it. I don't know whether it was a pistol or a burst of fire or naked at him. He was hit. And it was just like the tendons underneath the armpit was like leaving it attached to the body. And so he was moving around. And there's a limp sort of lifeless arm sort of like being dragged along with him. So trying to fix, they're not going to fix that in a team medic course. Yeah, you need a full A&E suite to be able to deal with something like that. You put on a couple of first field dressings and, the blood was just still coming through. I thought about trying to tourniquet it this is where my mind was at. Of course, you're not going to tourniquet collarbone. It's impossible. But that's what I said. I've got to do something, got to do something. At the same time, burst of fire came overhead. So I'm like, oh, bloody hell, I'm going to get it next, making myself as small as possible. But yeah, this team medic course, maybe it prepares you for some of the lesser injuries, maybe a twisted sock or something like that. But what this guy had and what the other guy had, I never figured out what happened to him. He was just unconscious for whatever reason, or playing possum. No, it was the substandard. But there was a time limit. What are they going to teach you in 5 days? You've got to go. The training program was full.
And what kind of resources did you have as a team medic in your kind of equipment pouch, in the team medic pouch? You mentioned case field dressings. Did you have any blood clotted agents and that kind of thing?
We had any clotting agents, no. So I had a decent amount of, because they'd stressed into us the risk of heat injury. I guess that's why they were putting us there, sort of like an insurance policy. They put it, when I was in the police, a court defensible statement to say, oh, well, we did provide, right, so, if someone goes down with heat stroke, right, we did provide a team medic. So I had a lot of, RRS, rehydration solutions, salts, that sort of thing. I had one bag of IV in it with a tube and a needle. No one showed me how to use it. They just gave it to me. So it made me feel important. They didn't have any tourniquets, any proper tourniquets. So I had some bungees from Halfords to act as tourniquets. And I had about 12 first field dressings, but they had to last the whole platoon. So if someone used a first field dress, I'd fill it up. And then I had one extra shot of morphine, 10 milligrams as well. So, well, that's kiddies doses in it. So, I had nothing. The vast majority of my equipment was first field dressings and stuff to prevent heat injuries. I had nothing. I had Asherman chest seal, didn't have that. No chest seal. I had cling film. Had some burn cream, but I think it was probably more useful for like sunburn as opposed to like 3rd-degree burns. Really under resourced. And before deploying, I went to an outdoor shop and supplemented my first aid kit with the stuff that I thought we were likely to get the cuts and scrapes that you get when you're crawling around anyway, because I didn't have any nothing sticky plasters, paracetamol, nothing. Normal bandages, tube grip. I had to buy that and put it in the kit as well. So it was a really sort of like hodgepodge of stuff. It was definitely not designed for gunshot wounds.
Yeah, mental, mate. I forget how under-resourced at times people were, especially on those earlier tours.
It's like green kit.
So you were wearing green kit?
Yeah, we had people with green ECB and green helmet covers. The fatigues, so the shirts, jackets. I was going to say the Japanese word for trousers. The trousers were they were a desert. But some of us had green body armor, green helmets still. So it came through eventually. And our Land Rovers were unarmored Northern Ireland strip downs. They weren't even Wemmicks; they were just Land Rovers.
So not like so basically the same Land Rover I could go and if I had the money, go and buy a Land Rover this afternoon. Just the same.
Just a Defender. There was nothing special about it at all. We put chicken wire and riot shields on the back so we could provide top cover, because they're the long wheelbase Land Rovers, so we could stand up out the top, and they were stripped down. There was no roof, so we could stand out the back and provide top cover on it. But for armor, we had riot shields. We'd been issued riot shields, but instead of having them in the CQMS's store, we used them to armor the size of Land Rovers. And we didn't have any hickory sticks. We didn't have any battens, so we had broom handles with and we drilled a hole in the bottom of the broom handle and put a bit of shoelace through it so you could attach it to your wrist. So if you had a public order incident, we had broom handles to wallop people with. So yeah, we were real under-resourced. We had off the Civvy Street Land Rovers, basically stuff that the RAF regiment had been cutting around in for internal patrols. It's Basra Airport. They came our way. They were just. We eventually got snatched Land Rovers, which were marginally better, but we started off with this unarmored wearing the Wolf.
And this would be, just for point of reference for people, a year after the actual invasion. So probably a year.
Yeah, 11 months.
Probably about a year and a half after it was actually decided that it was going to happen. So fair bit of time to buy tourniquets.
Yeah.
I know. So, well, no, that's exactly what I mean, mate. Just the procurement thing's a fucking joke. So, how did you break contact then? Did the QRF come out to you, or was it like was it just that they broke the contact themselves? What happened there?
Well, luckily, the lieutenant, we had this good lieutenant, really, because we had 4 lieutenants, one for each platoon, and then there was an officer lieutenant who's basically a third in command or something like that. But we had probably the best lieutenant. He was pretty switched on. So instead of patrolling as a section of 8, he split us into 2. And so his 4, which was me, a guy called Drury, 40, and the boss, lieutenant, we were on the ground with the cops sort of like covering them. He'd sent the Lance Corporal, who was the Section 2 IC, because the Section IC was actually that lieutenant, up into an abandoned building with some NVGs. So they were actually quite high up. So when the contact started, they were in a real good position to, where they didn't neutralize because we didn't find any, but we found blood and bandages from the firing point. So they'd been able to withdraw. Now, we never found out whether it was us on the ground with the hospital security, because they were doing like Beirut unload, shooting over, just not looking, just shooting. Or whether it was the QRF, or they did turn up quite late. I can't really remember. You could put a gun to my head, I would not remember the timings for that sort of contact. It was just that sort of frenetic. But they certainly broke contact. I don't think it was us who forced them back. I think they probably had a planned withdrawal. They probably wanted to do some damage and get away as quickly as possible, probably because I only saw one guy. There's probably 2 or 3, maybe. And then there may have been a drive-by as well. I think that's what started. That's what initiated it, was a drive-by on the cops. So it was kind of just like an ambush. I think they just wanted to attack, just, a raid, deliberate action with a planned withdrawal. When we got to the firing point where they had been shooting, which was on top of another building, an abandoned office block, they could see down onto us. So we were like really vulnerable. I'm surprised none of us got hit. They found blood, bandages, bullet cases up there, but they didn't see, there were no bodies. And obviously, they had their own casualty reception. They had their own plan for getting casualties out. Whether we caused it or one of the coppers' quarters or the security guards' quarters, I have no idea. But the contact ended as soon as it started. All of a sudden there was gunfire, and all of a sudden there was just like the sound. We were using a Klansman VHF at the time, so just the radio static afterwards. So like behind the wall, and you could just hear the radio static of the boss trying to reorganize everyone. So it started and finished in pretty much the same way, instant. It was instant noise followed by instant silence, and there was just that bit in between. There was full of action.
And you mentioned seeing them. Was that muzzle flash, or you could actually see like figures darting around it?
Yeah, I saw a silhouette because once I treated these casualties, I jumped over a fence. Right, so this fence was a bit taller than me. I'm tall. I'm 6 foot and a little bit, but not wide as you can see on the camera. But I was tall, but this fence was taller than me. I had to jump over. Just called out to my man. I said, "40, where the fuck are you?" He says, "Oh, with a fence." So I looked. I was like, "I'll just get over that." Like to myself and him at the same time. He says, "Jump over." I ain't gonna drop a C-bomb, but that's what he called me. He said, "Jump over," and I did, Olympic style. I didn't stick the landing, but I got over. Once I got over, there was another burst of fire where I'd just been, right? And I crawled behind this, I guess in the hospital gardens, it probably used to be like an ornamental planter, which is about 1.5 foot tall, full of dried dirt. Possibly at some time it looked quite nice. There must have been plants now at some point. But 40 was over. He was only a few feet away from me by then. And as soon as I was there, he started giving me a target indication. Well, I put over where he was looking. I looked through the SUSAT, and for the briefest of seconds, it must have been a second or maybe even a second and a half, I saw a silhouette from where he was talking about duck behind an improvised barricade. So I fired into that improvised barricade. I don't know where there's enough velocity to go through or how substantial that barricade was, but I didn't check when we got to the firing point. It just slipped my mind entirely. And so that was all I saw, this guy for about a second and a half. And where he went to cover, so bang, bang. So in the entire tour, I fired about 5 bullets in total. So, and those were the first 2. Yeah, so I saw him for about a second and a half, if that.
So you mentioned your SUSAT. So for people that's not familiar, that's basically your bog standard optic sight. On
4 times.
Did you have night vision and that kind of things? How many night vision sights would you say that you had per platoon?
Yeah, we had about one bloke in 4 had a NVG fixed the helmet. You know, the flip down one that goes over the left eye, so you can look with the left eye, and then you got your right eye for your gun optic, your SUSAT, and then you've got the left eye, you've got the optic that comes down and flips up. They weren't very good, but we did have them. I guess about one guy in 4 had them, and every platoon also had a thermal imager. So whereas we didn't have first aid kit, we did have optics. So that's something we did have. And not everyone had. Do you remember when you were in, you used to get the big night vision sight to stick on top of the individual weapon? Do you remember that? We didn't have any of those sorts of things. So we didn't have the capability to shoot at night unless we had a clear target. But we did have the visibility to see and scan at night using the optics that we were provided.
And when you were on patrols, these night patrols in Basra, was the city quite well lit up? Oh.
No, there were well lit places, no badly lit places, and that's because the electricity grid was totally messed up. And a lot of people were abstracting electricity from wherever they could get it. They were putting throwing cable over and stuff, and there were people stripping out copper wire to try and make some money and setting that on. So it was really hit or miss around the hospital. It was well lit around the hospital because I guess people left that alone, and maybe they had some sort of service in order in the hospital, some handymen or electricians in order to keep it well lit. Getting into the city, there was the occasional street light, and then when you went to semi-rural areas, which were kind of south of Basra and sort of towards another town called Okuhara, which was on the west, you forget it. You've got your vehicle lights or night vision. That's all you've really got.
So when you got back to your base after this contact, then how were you feeling, both as a platoon and yourself?
Yeah, we were like really sort of buzzing. We took a happy snap afterwards. The 8 of us, in the arch of Basra Palace. And once we got back, we thought, "There's a buzzing." We thought we'd done a good job. as far as we were concerned, we did a real good job, because once we passed off, or me and 40, once we handed off these 2 cops to the hospital, because luckily we're right by the hospital, right? So these 2 casualties, we don't have to third guy, like I said, they were alive when they got handed off. So we thought, oh, okay, definitive care, they're going to be all right, aren't they? We that golden 10 minutes, yeah, no, they died. But at the time, we didn't know. So we're like, oh, yeah, we're in the contact club now. Yeah, we're right. Yeah, we did a good thing. And we fought them back. Probably was a withdrawal, but, say at the time, oh, yeah, we got sorted that problem out. We were buzzing. And a lot of that is probably adrenaline. A lot of that is probably naivety. A lot of that is probably just thinking, thank fuck I survived that. And, you're just laughing at yourself. And one of the guys seems called Stick. Not because he was like really thin, but because he was about as agile as a stick. If you see a stick on the ground, it don't move. It's pretty much the same as that. So he's couldn't stick, right? He was stuck to the ground. He said, boys, we was lucky then. We was lucky. And, we all burst into laughter when he said that. And because he was right, but also because we were kind of like just decompressing from that high adrenaline moment. So that's pretty much how we would be. I've never felt like that again. That's the only time in my life I've actually felt like that. There were other contacts, but that's the only time in my life I've ever had that particular feeling.
So that's obviously like a danger when you're going out on the ground, having these small arms attacks and things. What about IEDs and indirect fire?
Yeah, we got indirect fire quite a lot. Basra Pass is a big place. We used to get attacked either by the 107 rockets, 107mm rockets, which are really simple to fire. You can fire them with a 9-volt battery and a couple of bricks just to rudimentarily aim it to where you want it to go, and mortar fire as well. We did get a lot of that. I mean, it was very, very easy for them to accomplish. And of course, the IED threat was the biggest one. It was the one that was talked about most about in the news. We carried ECM with us in order to try and disrupt the IED threat a little bit. But we never lost anyone to IEDs in our company, but we certainly heard them when we were on patrol because the explosion was so loud. And we were affected by them as well because it kind of just messed up the road network. And of course, if you blow up a road, right, in a city where there's no way to fix the Royal Engineers have got to come and fix that road, right? Because there's no civil service to come and fix it. That limits the number of roads available, which makes them more dangerous for small arms fire, deliberate contacts. So whereas our company was never actually hit by an IED, we were certainly affected by we were only ever hit by indirect fire in the base or on contact whilst on patrol.
And what were the kind of IEDs that you were on the lookout for at this time?
Most of them were actually discarded munitions from the 1980s conflict of Iran and Iraq. So Basra, if people don't know, is right on the border of Iran and Iraq. And there was a big conflict there in the 80s between Saddam Hussein's forces and the Ayatollah's forces who were in the Iranian Revolution. And because that was a very, very big sort of trench warfare situation, we had a stalemate, basically World War I, but in the 1980s in the Arabian Peninsula. There's a lot of detritus and a lot of leftover munitions over there. And the terrorists, the insurgents, the Mahdi Army, they would pay people to go in to look for discarded old RPG rounds or mortar bombs and those sorts of things. Because even though they were unreliable and a lot of people got blown up as soon as they lifted to trying to make some money and bring the stuff back. But once they managed to bring the stuff back, whoever these bomb makers were, they knew how to extract the material that they needed from that explosive in order to make a new bomb from it. So my understanding was that the vast majority of IEDs in and around Basra were recycled bomb components from the Iranian Iraq war. I don't know to what extent they were getting technical help from any other forces or factions or whether anyone was bringing them anything else in. I do know, because I spoke to one of the interpreters, his name was Jacob, about the Iran-Iraq battlefield, because I was a bit of a nerd for that sort of period in history. And he was telling me about it, and the subject diverted to he lived locally, you see, about the number of people who would go in just to try and make a few dollars to pick up some explosives and bring it back. They get blown up, or, they start making a stable, sort of semi-stable income from being able to do it quite regularly. Recycled bomb components was the biggest ingredient for IEDs.
Tell us more about the interpreters, mate. Did you get to know about their background and their motivations, and what were your kind of feelings working with them?
I spoke to two of the interpreters. One of them, luckily, he got out of Iraq. He's happily settled down now in America. I wouldn't say his name because he's happily settled down. I don't want it to become a target for anything or anything. He managed to get out. He's got a wife and he lives in one of the States. He's doing very successfully. He's bilingual, obviously English and Arabic, and so he's a very useful guy. The other guy, Jacob, he actually got killed in the end. Not on our tour, but another one. But I liked him. He was sort of like this very French sort of je ne sais quoi about everything. He always just rolled up in his mouth and he was just totally chilled out and relaxed. And he talked to you about anything. He lived in the city on his own, and he dressed a bit like a journalist when I saw him. He always had like a plaid shirt on with a sort of like fishing vest for pockets to carry like his cigarettes and his money, and a pair of khaki trousers and a nice pair of brown shoes. So he looked like a bit like a 1980s, 1970s journalist. He was a real cool guy. He wasn't very talkative. You had to talk to him, but he was always happy to talk back. And I thought he was dead friendly. You know, his motivation for doing it was, well, one, I'm not risking anything. I'm a single guy. I haven't got a family or anything like he told me. And the other thing was, it paid good. You could make $2 a day working on the British base, you know, cleaning out shitters, or you could make like whatever they made. I never asked. It's rude to ask, I guess. Being an interpreter, it came with risks. Most of the interpreters, when they were on duty, they slept inside the base. They bought their car and just slept in the car. When they were off duty, a lot of them used to sleep in the chicane on the approach road to the base. So they knew that, you know, they'd be more reasonably safe because we had a couple of signers on the front. So, and floodlights as well. Of course, that blocked up the chicane, and that in itself was a danger, and they had to get moved along quite a lot. But, you know, if you moved them along, they'd be back within a couple of nights if they're off duty. They'd be sleeping in the chicane. They knew what they were doing was dangerous. You know, Jacob, he in the end, not on TEDx 4, I think it was TEDx 6 or 7, he got killed. I don't know the nature of his death, but one of my friends who went back out as a full-time reserve service, he volunteered, he told me, and I was like, oh, well, sorry to hear that. It's quite sad. But yeah, they knew the risk, the interpreters. They were good that they're in for the accident.
And would they have to hide their identities while they were on the ground with you?
Well, I don't know whether the interpreters hid their identities. Ours certainly didn't. I mean, Jacob was obviously Jacob anywhere in the city. He's the only Arab that I knew who wore a plaid vest, plaid shirt and a fishing vest and brogues, right? And the other interpreter we had with us, he was big. He was like a bodybuilder, sort of big. Not like Iron Man, isn't it? Not Mr. Universe sort of big, but he was conspicuously big. Maybe other interpreters at other locations, maybe they were more subtle in what they were doing, but the two that we had were noticeably working for the Brits.
What was your opinion, and like the wider opinion that you came across, if it was even a question at the time, of resettlement for interpreters?
I never even came across my mind. It never came to my mind. I guess I was a bit sort of like, you remember that scene in Forrest Gump, and they're talking about shrimping, and then Bubba says, "Oh, when we win this war, we're going to shrimp these waters." I was kind of naive like that. I thought the Brits and the Americans, they're going to do such a good job that Iraq would be stable and it'd be, UK and Arabia or whatever. And I didn't think that, but, you know, I guess to some extent I believed that. I thought by the time the British involvement had ended, you'd end up with something like a Good Friday Agreement in Iraq where everyone was shakes hands. They were sorry about that. Obviously, that's definitely what didn't happen. But that was my thought at the time. Now, resettlement for the interpreters, get them out of there. For God's sakes. I mean, they helped us. Let's do them a favor, right? So.
A great point, mate. Like I said, it's hard. I mean, I didn't go out there until end of 2006, by which point I think it was quite clear to everyone it was fucked. So it's quite hard for me to think what it would have been like to be there close to the beginning and you know, when things were kind of on the up. So that summer then, apart from that first contact, which is obviously like a big notable moment, what's something else that really sticks out to you from that summer?
Well, it is quite a lot. I mean, it's good things, bad things. I mean, we had other contacts. So we had silly little things. We had a general come to visit us, and I don't know, maybe it's coming across. I'm naturally a bit of a chatterbox, and even though I'm from Gloucester, but in the southwest, I don't have a noticeable sort of southwestern accent, sort of thing, you know. So when this general came to visit, and we were on QRF at the time, Sergeant Major came in and said, "Oh, you come here." I said, "Well, my God, what have I done wrong?" Because the Sergeant Major only spoke to me when he was annoyed with me. So I thought, "What's he want?" He says, "Well, you're a child little twat and you don't have an accent. You make tea for the general stand." There was this table with a kettle and a plate of biscuits, because there's always got to be a plate of biscuits when a general comes, isn't there, right? So he said, "Right, you stand there, you haven't got an accent, you stand there and make the general a cup of tea." The general turns up and he never took, of course he didn't. His bodyguard had the cup of tea, but the general didn't even look at me, just walked straight past. So I pocketed all the hobnobs, took him back to the QRF room, and I was just chatting to this guy from the RMP who's standing there looking all cool with his MP5 and in shades and things like that. And he said to me, "How do you get this shitty little job?" And I said, "Well, apparently I'm a twatty little child. I'm cut out for this sort of thing." So that's one of the notable things for me. There were other contacts as well. We had to do a night patrol. We had snatches later on in the tour. About halfway through, we got snatched Land Rovers, which of course have a terrible reputation. But we were driving through a market, and there was no one in the market at night, and that's odd. You know, even at nighttime, you'd expect to see the store holders looking after their store. You're sleeping there with a baseball bat or something just to protect their stuff. There was no one there, so obviously something was going to go down. By the time we realised these were combat indicators, this RPG came between. We had two snatches about 20 meters apart. It should have been further. It miraculously landed between the two Land Rovers and blew up a wall. And all the brickwork and masonry came and hit the sides of the vehicles, and we didn't get hit. And then another one came, and that missed too. So we had to get out of there real quick, because we had no idea really where they were coming from, these shots. Because as soon as these two RPGs stopped shooting, there's a lot of small arms fire came. They'd obviously seen us coming, because we were coming down a one-way street next to the river. There was no space to even do a three-point turn. So why we were using that road, I have no idea. I said the lieutenant was switched on. This was the one time he wasn't. So they'd have had a good 10 minutes to get sorted out and plan an ambush. But we got up there, and as we were withdrawing, we had to go basically down the same road again. So it's a long straight road, and I was in the rear Land Rover. Saw the guys, the enemy. I call them enemy, but the terrorists and such. Well, they were repositioning, and that was the other time I fired my weapon. Was those 3 shots as we were withdrawing. I had a sight. It wasn't a good sight picture, but I had a sight picture. And it was enough, in my mind, just throw some lead down, because everyone else was shooting. We had one guy, the mini-me, so he was putting it down a lot more than me. But everyone else was shooting it, and I saw roughly where they would bang, bang. Shouldn't have done that, really, because it wasn't a decent sight picture, but I was scared. And, that's what happened in the end.
Yeah, it should be worth talking now, because if that was Afghan, you'd have just emptied the magazine at them with the rules of engagement. You'd have been entirely in your rights to just go on with your magazine pouches empty. Can you explain to people what the rules of engagement were when you're firing these rounds, and how that factors into your process of about when you pull the trigger?
Okay, so do you remember the Good Friday Agreement? It only happened like 5 years before 1998, and that was basically the British Army learned its city patrolling skills, its soft or low-intensity conflict skills in Northern Ireland. So a lot of those skills transferred over to Southern Iraq, and, to some extent, the provincial areas of Afghanistan, although that was mostly the Marines, who maybe worked a little bit different to the infantry. We had to carry with us something called Card Alpha, which was the rules of engagement. And it clearly said that if you intended to use your weapon, you had, unless it was impossible, like the 2 times I did, you had to notify the person you're going to shoot that you were in the military, British forces or army, and then you had to give them the opportunity to surrender. And then we were told in no uncertain terms by the RMP in our build-up training that you will be required to justify every time you shoot everybody. You have to we had this lady captain from the RMP, and she was like her hands on hips, or like kind of bigging it up a bit, I guess. And he had the impression on me: justify everybody that you fire, you've got to be able to justify in a court of law. Otherwise you didn't do. So maybe that would have. Well, it did have a bit of an impact on me. I could, like you said, I could have fired a few more rounds. I didn't have a very good sight picture, was maybe the other reason I didn't fire. So I could we was drawing, the vehicle's moving a lot, and I'm in the hatch and the top cover, so you're trying to go against the G-force of the vehicle swerving, and maybe I could have fired some more, but we were told under no uncertain terms that, we were obliged under Card Alpha to be able to justify all of our actions, and maybe my naivety made me a bit more prone to doing it by the book. Certainly now, if I went out as this map, I'd have done it differently. But then, we were bound by the rules of engagement.
Yeah, because I think that always surprises people, this idea that you've just been contacted. You know that that's where they are, but you can't, because it goes when you're in your training or your 10 days of training as a reservist soldier, it's fire into likely enemy positions, suppress the enemy, keep their heads down, but you're just feeling, I've got to actually wait until I not only see someone, but see him about to shoot at me, and then I can fire him.
Well, my pre-deployment training was longer than my military service at that point, right? So, of course, the pre-deployment training had a huge impact on me. I took it all as gospel. I had nothing to compare it to. So I had no life experience. I was 19. I was a banker. I wasn't used to dealing with conflict or violence. I worked at a bank. The most I had was a snotty customer who didn't like the interest rates. I mean, come on. So it was a real big difference in environment. And then you grow up quick out there in that sort of situation.
Did when you came out in, was it the April, over that summer? I mean, obviously, like you mentioned, one BWR Simic House. I mean, there's a Victoria Cross given out up there, which will give some people the idea of the fighting. And then coming to the end of your tour, then did you feel like the Iraq that you arrived in was a different Iraq to the one that you were leaving?
Nah, man, I didn't think that at all. I thought it was the same place as I was coming in. The 6 months went really, really slowly until you got to the end, and you think, oh, that went really, really quickly. I was counting down the days. I was counting down the days before going to Iraq, thinking, I can't wait. This is going to be cool. It's an adventure of a lifetime. So great. Got into theatre, and I was counting down the days until I could get home. My understanding of the situation in Iraq was very, very limited. I'd not really looked into it. My situation was what I read in the newspaper. And of course, the newspapers is going to lead to the left or the right. It's very rarely sort of like centrist position and giving the whole story. And it just so happens I was reading semi sort of like right-wing sort of daily angry newspapers. So, yeah, this war's totally justified. Saddam Hussein's a bad guy. Well, we got him. We just have to clean up the mess and let the Iraqis elect their own governments and everything will be okay. TM medals, and one day they'll have a documentary about me. I'm sure they will. That was my feeling. When the tour ended, you mentioned about the Victoria Cross was given out in Al-Amara. We were a TA company in Basra City. They had to replace us with a Marine company. Royal Marines had to come in and take us because the situation deteriorated so much in the city that they couldn't really have weekend warriors reservists, and we had a bit of backfill from the Royal Horse Artillery as well, supporting us. So not really any out-and-out combat troops. A Marine company came in to take over Basra Palace, as well as a load of PMs, private military contractors, and 90% of them were Gurkhas. So it was obvious that the situation had deteriorated quite a lot. But at the time, I couldn't see that Iraq was getting any better or any worse. I was quite jaded by it. I turned up in a shit on. It's still a shit on. I can't wait to get out of here. I'm out. That was my feeling on it.
And why were you? What was the? I mean, obviously, when you're away from home and you're a young lad, you miss going on the base, you miss your family and all that stuff. But when you got out of there, and did you? Once you kind of had a taste, was it almost enough of, right, I've seen what it's about, I kind of want to go home at this point? Did you feel at that point like, you because you mentioned you had two things you wanted to do, the military and the police. Did you just want to kind of get on to the next phase of your life once you'd kind of had that bit of a, that you'd got out there, you'd done some business, it's like, I want to just move on now to the next stage of my life?
Yeah, I stayed in the reserves for a little while. I did go and join the police. I got 2 years after I joined the police. So I stayed at the bank a little bit longer. And then, went on to the police. So, I had no once I've seen what it was like for real, I mean, maybe it was a good thing that I never joined the regulars. I would know if it. I was a very, very unlikely infantryman. I'm vegetarian. Yeah, you can say I've been vegetarian since I was 8 years old. I hate meat. I hate fish. Can't stand the stuff. Right, never eat it. Always hungry, especially in Iraq. Right, I'm pretty high strung. Right, my nickname in the police was Princess because I used to cry so much. Right, so I was completely not what you expect an infantryman to be. Okay, but I went out there because it was my interest. It was my genuine interest. Then I went on to join the police. I did 11 years in the police before coming to Japan. So I managed to get it out of my system. But perhaps it was providence or luck that I ended up being a reservist, where someone with my sort of temperament fit in quite well. If I'd have joined PWRR or the Guards or some of the Marines, they'd have eaten me alive. I wouldn't have thought they'd have killed me, not the insurgents. They'd have been awful for me. I would never manage that.
So, what's something that you kind of learned about yourself that's stayed with you for the rest of your life after Iraq? Kind of guided you through your life since?
I kind of learned a sort of resilience that I never had before. Like I said, I kind of do get upset. And a lot of the times before that, if I first got upset, I just lose interest in whatever it was that upset me, or run away from it, or ignore it, or say, I'm not going to do anything to do with it anymore. I still got upset, but I had the sort of resilience to actually persevere and stick with things instead. So I actually learned the kind of resilience that I never learned at school. I went to a soft school, music and drama were the things at the school I went to. Right? So it wasn't like an art kid. I wasn't like a rugby player or anything. Right. So I learned a kind of resilience that I'd never had the opportunity to learn before. And I was listening to a podcast and I was listening today actually, 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks. I can't remember the name of the lad, but he was talking about how he went to when he was 16, he went to Harrogate. And he had quite a difficult upbringing. And I thought, well, I get where he's coming from, but I can't relate. And I think this kind of guy was probably sort of cut out for the army, cut out for the good at what he did. A lot of the time, I thought I was there by accident, but I did get a sort of tenacity to see things through, and that was the biggest thing I took away from uniform service.
What was the process of coming home at the end of this compulsory mobilized service?
Get on the hut, go to Qatar, get on the plane, go to Bryce. That's it. We had nothing. We had no decompression. Well, we did. That's a lie. We did have decompression. About a month after coming back, we all got ordered to go to Taunton TA Centre, and they gave us all a tenner and say, go and get pissed. And then we all just hang out for in the TA Centre. That's it. That's the decompression. We had nothing. So once we'd handed in the equipment, NVGs, and cleaned the weapons, and we got to keep the desert kit, which is great. I've still got it now. I use it for gardening. But, we had no sort of decompression, nothing to address any sort of mental or physical needs when we got back. It was just oh, great, thanks for that. You got a certificate. We had a welcome back video shot by a general, so we didn't get met by a general. We went to an auditorium and saw a video of a general welcoming us back. Can't remember which one it was now. Real crusty old looking guy with a red beret. What's his name? I can't remember. Yeah, and there you go. Right, so he had a video of us coming back. I thought, well, we didn't even get a major or captain. Not this. And we got on the bus, and the guys in the TA Centre, they'd laid on some stuff for us, crates of beer, Domino's pizza, that sort of stuff. But once that was consumed, it was back home, and I couldn't sleep for the first few nights because I live in rural Gloucestershire, and I wasn't used to the sound of cows anymore. Right, so that changed on the way in. I got the same process in reverse on the way back, and I guess now they hadn't really considered the impact it would have of sending so many reservists out en masse, and they didn't have a system to receive them back at that time. It may have been different in other tours, but they did. No, we didn't stop up in Cyprus for a bit of, adventure training. I said, no, we was just back. And a month after, you could go and see the Padre if you wanted it, but otherwise, as a tenant, go to town and get pissed. And well, we went to town and we got pissed. That was it. I never thought mostly of it again after that, actually.
And from what you know, did obviously you said you stayed in for a couple more years, right?
Yeah.
Was that the kind of general gist? Did a lot of people feel like they'd had, they'd done the tour, they'd had enough? Or do you think it was good for retention in the TA, bad, neutral?
the thing is, I stayed in, but I didn't stay in. Well, what I did, I stayed in the reserves, but I went to a university UOTC and became an under officer. Yeah, so I managed to stay in, which is basically a grown-up version of the cadets. And I did a load of training with them for a few years until I managed to get a Type B commission. And then once I got that, I thought, well, I've done that soon after I quit. That was it. So I never had to do anything with the TA again. But basically, once I got back from Iraq, one of our lads died, and that really sort of like upset me and a lot of the other guys. And I thought, well, I don't want to do this anymore. And so I just fulfilled my sort of military ambitions or whatever by doing this sort of like watered down thing, because I was young enough and I had decent qualifications so I could go to the UOTC. So I did that. But some of the other guys, one of them is now a sergeant major in the artillery. So he stayed in and made a full career out of it. Our lieutenant in our platoon, he went on to become a JTAC, so bringing in the aircraft in Afghanistan. So he was very, very good. He was a natural born soldier. Natural born officer is excellent, really. And most people are in for sort of like officers. And we did have one really bad one. I won't mention his name, but we had a good one. Some left straight away. One moved to another country in South America where because he married a South American lady. Some quit there and then they said, I'm not doing this ever again. They quit straight away. And some stayed in and worked their way up the reservist career ladder. So I don't think it did much for retention, because I think the people that were going to stay, and the ones that were going to leave, were going to leave. I mean, the turnover in the reserves is high anyway. You don't have to buy your way out. You don't have to. Once you're finished, you're finished. I think doing one tour was probably enough for most people. Although, some of them did go to Afghanistan as well. We lost another one in Afghan. So, retention, I don't know. You either want to be in the army or you don't. I don't think there's anything in the middle. Once you're stuck on a tour, you're stuck on the tour. But if you want to be in or you want to be out, then there's a pathway for both of those.
So tell me to fuck off if you don't want to talk about it, mate. But the bloke you mentioned losing, was that on the tour or when you got back?
No, right. So we had this guy, and he had a really bad contact, right? So he was a part of a convoy, a resupply convoy. And it was 2 snatches, one front and back, and 2 4-ton trucks in the middle, unarmored. And he was driving, and the other guy was top covering. So the front snatch got whacked by an RPG. It destroyed the driver's cabin. So the commander and the driver, it was vaporized basically, and he was gone. And there was a lot of small arms fire. And of course, these were unarmored 4-ton trucks, right? So the bullets came through the cabin and hit the guy on top cover. And it hit him through the armor. And this wasn't like this Osprey armor, which is good. This is ECB, this is Kevlar. This is the same stuff that, police officers used to wear in the 1980s, SWAT teams used to wear in the 1980s. Useless. Right, so the bullet just went straight through it. Disemboweled the guy basically all across the front of the cab. So this guy had to drive out of the contact. And that badly affected him, and badly affected all of us when we heard the details. And the guy who got shot, he actually survived. They got him out of there and he survived, and I spoke to him afterwards. But the thing that got me the most is that this guy is from Gloucester, and it's a small community, and he worked at the same factory as my uncle. So I found out through my uncle that he died. I never found out through the official channel. And he was like, because he was the oldest one there. He was 47. I was 19, and he was like he knew about my idiosyncrasies, and he liked me, and I liked him. And when we learned about his death, it was he died. The stress of it got to him, and he didn't do himself in. It was just it's it's one of those things. So yeah. I mean, it's just Gloucester, it's a small city, and then it's a even smaller TA, it's just, that's it, And we had a funeral, and we couldn't get everyone inside the church, and we had to lay on coaches. He was a real popular guy from the factory and the TA, and he used to be a Grenadier Guardsman, or the veterans from his old unit camp. So, yeah, it was that was a big, and he said some of the nicest things anyone's ever said about me as a soldier. Like I said, I was an unlikely soldier. And he said to my parents when I came back, he says, that's the bravest man I've ever met. No one ever called me a man before. So, it all hits hard. But I was quite upset by that as well. I think other people were probably more upset. They knew him better than I did, but you can't compare one person's sorrow to another's, can you? You got your own. You deal with your own. Don't you?
And have you ever had any like effects from let's just say, were you a changed person in any kind of ways that you wish you weren't?
Yeah. I got I don't talk about it, and I'll give you the very short version. But I was quite badly affected a few years later on by it. I was dealing with quite a lot of stress in my other job, and then I got to the point where, when every time I went to sort of sleep or end up in a stressful situation, I was kind of transported back to these sort of stressful situations. When I was going to sleep at night, I was, entering a stressful world. So I was never actually fully rested for, months and years. And I got very, very sick because of it. One of the reasons I had to leave the police was because I was actually quite poorly. I didn't want to leave the police. I was recommended that I left. So in the end, I did. And that's one of the reasons I moved to Japan. But yeah, I was quite bad. I don't talk about it much more than that. That's the short version. I think a few guys were affected by it, including me.
And did that play any reason into you wanting to write the book and kind of get your thoughts on paper?
I did. It was quite cathartic writing the book. I don't mention much about why my motivations for writing the book. I am an avid reader. I love reading. My biggest hobby. I became even more reader once I moved out to Japan. I got a huge library collection of books, and my brother's a very avid reader as well. It's just a family thing. But my motivation for writing it was just to get the thoughts down. My thoughts, right? Okay. The way I remember Optetic 4 is going to be different from everyone else, possibly even from the people in the same section as me. So I put them down as the way that I thought they would be. But I also wanted to get away from, right? Like I said, I love reading, but if you want to go and get a book about the military, you're going to get a book that says, I'm a hero, I'm a hero, I'm a hero. I've got medals, I've done this, I've done that. Yeah, I got awards, but I don't put them in the book. I wanted to have a real, put something out there that was very human, the most human experience of war possible. Not trauma porn, not, I'm a hero, anything like that. Just, this is the lived experience of the infantryman at that time, because there's nothing really out there like that. Nothing that I could find anyway. Maybe one of your listeners could, get onto Insta or whatever, correct me and say, well, I recommend this book because that's what you're talking about. Please do, because I love reading. I would read that book that kind of book in a heartbeat. But I never found one which gave a very human account of war. It was always kind of A plus B, and then I got the medal, or A plus B, and this happened. It's kind of SAS, SBS, or things. That makes up like 1% of the force. 20% of the force in Iraq was reservists, right? And there's nothing really represents what reservists do.
And what's your kind of opinion now, with hindsight, looking back on this idea of mobilizing a group of reservists together, deploying them together, demobilizing them together? What do you think of the kind of the pros and cons of it?
Well, politically, it looks very good, doesn't it? If you have a lot of reservists, politicians say our army is this big, when in actual fact it isn't that big. So, that's a nice political thing. And also, whilst they're not on ops, they're not on the army's payroll. They're only getting paid for like some weekends and Tuesdays, aren't they? So that's a very good thing. On the other hand, they're very expensive to deploy. But there's a recruitment problem in the army. Why would people join the army at the moment? I've not been back to UK, and since coming to Japan, I've not been back, and I've seen it looks like a different country to when I left, and I can understand why. There is a recruitment process problem, regardless of which company is in charge of implementing recruitment. I've heard that's a problem too. But you maintaining a full-time army with motivated people, other than the officer corps, that's going to be very, very hard. And so, like we said at the start of the interview, or close to starting, most Toms are about 18, 19 years old, right? How are you going to convince an 18 or a 19-year-old to join the army now? I mean, especially with the world being as connected as it is, and people getting to see a lot more of what soldiering actually really is like. When you join the army at 18 or 19, you kind of get a bit idealistic about it now, right? You can go on the internet now and you'll see soldiers getting wiped up. It's uncensored, there's no sort of filter anymore. So 18, 19-year-olds are a bit more switched on about what the military is going to be like. So if you do want to do that for a career, well, yeah, I'll shake your hand. That's an honourable thing. I'd have done the same when I was age too, but I know better now. So, yeah, reservists, I think, are going to be a much more important part of the army going forward, because I think that's the only way they're going to be able to maintain any sort of like credible fighting force in the UK with the attrition rates of the soldiers, recruitment problems. When people do want to join, they want to learn a trade, don't they? They don't want to be PBI. So reservists are, in my opinion, going to be more and more important as time goes on.
And what do you think, on the off chance that we have someone in a influential position listening to this? I was listening and he was like, okay, how could we do things better about bringing reservists home? What would you kind of recommend?
Well, don't send them out there in the first place. But if you do send them out there and you've got to bring them back, right? The reintegration, I guess the reintegration process now is better. There was nothing for me yesterday. Thanks for that. They gave me a certificate, which was printed on an A4 on a really thin piece of A4 paper, no frame, nothing. I've got it down here. It's quite important. But, you don't really... you don't feel like, well, I don't suppose you would, because if you came back from a tour, it's one army now, isn't it? You'd be treated the same as reservists and whatever, but you've taken a big risk in your life and been taken away from your chosen career. It's almost like in the Second World War, the First World War, and you got your citizens. I mean, you are being told to leave your chosen career and your family and whatever. Even though you volunteered to be a reservist, I mean, it's quite a rough way to bring someone into conflict. And then if you're going to bring them out of civil life and put them into conflict, I mean, you've got to have the exact opposite, the opposite forces. You've got to have a reintegration processes which kind of offset that form of going in, which, like I said, we never had. And I don't know what they could do on tickets to Alton Towers. I don't know, whatever. But and a better support network as well, I think, because I know that a few people were affected by the injury, and me were affected after it took a long time to settle. And being out of the reserves, I've been out of the reserves for a long time. It was quite hard to get the MOD. It took me a long time for the MOD to start helping me with the treatment. I was a pain in the ass for my GP. It took about 18 months, 2 years before I started getting sort of proper treatment. That's a long time to live with those sort of feelings as well. I mean, I've thought about ending it a few times. So they've got to be able to have a process, a better process. I'm sure they do by now, but if they don't, well, you better get one, because if there's conflict around the corner, which all the news channels are saying, right, you're going to have a lot of people coming back feeling pretty bad about what they've done.
I don't want to push into anything you don't want to talk about, mate. So what I will just ask is this: in that time that you've been out since leaving, have you ever received a phone call or anything like that to be like, hey, Matt, how are you getting on? And not from a mate, I mean now from an official channel, to be like,
no.
It's okay. So no, like, it's Major such and such. I saw you got mobilized on this day. Anything we can do for you? How are you getting on? Nothing like that.
No, the closest I've got is we've got a Facebook group of about 20 of us from Salamanca Company. We're called Salamanca Company, so we call ourselves Salawankers. There's about 20 of us, and we stay in touch-ish sometimes on Instagram. I mean, no, I've not heard it from any sort of officials or anything. I mean, most of the people I never saw. Once I'd left Gloucester to go join the OTC, I never saw most of them again. I never heard from any of them again. Certainly not any of the officers. I know one of the officers went on to become quite successful. He was actually the guy in charge of the MTP camouflage project. So he managed to get up quite senior and get a decent project out of it. But no, I've never heard from any official channels or anything since then.
Do you think that you should? Do you think that because I mean, I guess it's one thing to ask, have you? It's another thing to think, is that something that you think should happen?
I mean, that's got a Christmas card, wouldn't
it? Yeah. No, I'm totally with you, mate. Why is it you think that people do drift apart? Like, because those guys you were with, 90 of you, I'm sure, you might have had some people you got on better with than others, but generally speaking, you are the old band of brothers. Why is it, do you think, that kind of soldiers drift apart after those?
Yeah, but you drift apart, don't you? But if you're the sword making, it'd be your best mate, wouldn't it? Within seconds. But there's the geographical thing. I mean, Salamanca is drawn over the southwest. I mean, I'd never been to Cornwall before I joined the TA. I around Gloucester, head north. I'd never gone south. So there's a geographical thing. People are busy. Obviously, they're not full-time soldiers. They're going back to their lives they had beforehand, different circles of friends, families, starting families, or, kids are going to school or university. They've got other priorities. I mean, they've got their lives to live. I mean, that life was very, very temporary. That military life is temporary. You're a reservist, aren't you? So maybe you're a reservist in your private life as well. And you're going back to the main thing as opposed to the part-time thing. Maybe that's kind of like a psychosomatic or psychological way to look at it. But we stay in touch. Some of us mostly taking the piss out of each other, how it is. But I think in the army in general, I think you just drift apart because you move from one life to the next. And that's just that. I mean, no one's come out to Japan. I mean, I've been there for 9 years and none of them's coming to visit me. Just how things are, I think.
The floor is yours, mate. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to speak of? Could be literally anything you want. It could be anything you want to get out on your chest, mate. Anything.
I don't know. It's been a good. It was a good long hour and 3/4. That isn't it? So that's quite a lot. I mean, no one's going to buy the book now because I've just spoken it all. I have to give them an audio book, innit?
Well, yeah. The problem. Have you done an audio book?
I will do. I haven't done one yet. The book is that new. It's I mean, literally, it got released a few weeks ago. Have you? So I guess you haven't read it. It's new.
I haven't, mate. To be quite honest, unless it's anything to do with the Somme, I've not been reading anything other than the Somme.
Send your address. I've got some copies. Yeah, I'll send you off from Japan. I'll sign it up and send it out to you. Just send me the letter across.
If I tell you what, as well. Actually, I'll speak to you off air about this because I don't want to put you on the spot. So one thing I would ask, I've actually got two more questions for you, mate. Second to last question is, would you do it all again?
Yeah, I'd do it again.
Okay, last question, off topic. 3 books that you can't live without.
3 books I can't live without. Well, I got one of them here. For Whom the Bell Tolls, Ernest Hemingway. Probably can't see that. Yeah. That's a really, really good one. I like First Light by Geoffrey Wellham. That's an RAF pilot in the Second World War. And also I like Simon Murray's Legionnaires, a lad who joined the French Foreign Legion back in the 60s. So they're all good books and I can read them many, many times over.
Well, I don't have 2 of those, so I'll be ordering them. I don't know, a bit like you, mate. But there's, all right, I am going to put you on spot. There's a Japanese word for the love of collecting books because of the unknown, to know that you've just got this like wall covered in all these unknown stories that you can just go and pick out at any time. I saw this on Instagram. It could be bollocks for all I know. I don't know if you ever come across it, but it's a lot easier to buy books than read them is what I kind of find.
Like the word you're looking for is probably otaku. The word you look one is probably otaku. I don't know if there's one specifically about books, but otaku just means like geek or nerd. So it'd be honno ogaku, which means a book nerd. Honno otaku. Sorry.
Right. If anyone else can speak Japanese, just let me know if Matt said anything rude then or not. Mate, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on. I will let people know if they go down in the show notes, there'll be links to the book down there and everything. But yeah, mate, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And anytime you can do anything to help with the book or anything like that, please do give us a shout.
I'll give you a shout, yeah.
Thanks very much, mate.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, there we have it. And this is take number 10 on the outro because I have a very needy cat next to me, our executive producer, Lolo. Matt, thanks so much for your time today, mate. Really appreciate it. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us, as always. If you can, please share the show. It's the only way we can grow. And if you think this is worth listening to, then someone else will do too. Everything in terms of follows and stuff, Matt's details are down in the show notes. The podcast social media is down in the show notes. Link to Matt's book down there. And don't forget as well, if you follow along on social media, at Veteran State of Mind on Instagram, there will be details of how to get on the signed copy of Matt's book. If you are interested in being a guest on the show, or if you have someone that you might want to volunteer, then be a good mate and send those names in. We have an email address listed and everything down there. Shoot us an email, shoot us a DM. But yeah, please do put your names in the hats, guys. We're always looking for people. I'll get to as many of these as I can. Love to speak to every veteran if I could. So let's keep it going. Until next time, look after yourselves, be kind to each other. I'll catch you again very soon.